So really the difference in approach, is that we might sum it up by saying, as I said just now, um, the man of knowledge comes from the angle of addressing the mind first, and then leads the apprentice to the heart. The light bringer starts with the heart, and he trusts that the apprentice has enough emotional and mental maturity to see to the development of his mind by himself, as an adult, as a responsible adult.
Was there something specific in your life that made you realize or got you to realize that your role was going to be changing?
Not really. Not really. I had suspected that my fate was unfolding in such a way that I may one day find myself in the path of the light bringer. But there was no clear indication of that, I must be honest. And there wasn't ever really a time when I thought very much about it. But I suppose the first, if you like, positive indication that I got in that respect was an injunction which I received, if I recall the dates, I think it was in 1995 when I received that injunction. And that injunction actually had everything to do with establishing upon the physical plane what I was told then would become known as the Temple of Peace. And it was clear from an injunction that only a light bringer could actually fulfill that purpose. That was the first clear indication that I had that I would find myself in this lifetime still on the path of the light bringer. But it was only several years after I received that injunction when it became clear to me, very clear, that I was actually undergoing a massive inward change, and that slowly but surely my whole approach towards the teachings as well as towards life was changing, and I found myself coming more and more from the angle of the light bringer until it was abundantly clear to me that my destiny has not changed from that of the man of knowledge to that of the light bringer.
In your books, you indicate that 1995 was a very big year for humanity.
Indeed.
What was this big change, this big year, 1995?
I'll have to go back a step in order to answer that. In the life of the individual who is busy seeking real answers to his or her life, and by that I mean the purpose of our lives upon the physical plane, the purpose of physical incarnation, if you like. There comes a time when inwardly we know without a shadow of a doubt that our old lives are over forever. There's no way we can turn back the clock, and there's no way that we can ever go back to the way of life. And by way of life I mean everything that we call the way of life. The way we approach life, the way we think about life, the way we feel about life, the way we approach life, everything changes. And we can never go back to doing it like we used to do it. Technically speaking, we call that the knock of the spirit. In other words, our true selves has made its presence felt, and we call that the knock of the spirit. When the knock of the spirit happens for humanity collectively, as a whole, we call it the cry of the eagle. And that is what happened in June 1995. The cry of the eagle was sounded. In other words, the spirit of man made its presence felt. And that was a momentous change in the history of humanity. Although many people are still totally unaware that it even happened. So they are aware of the fact that the world is busy changing drastically, but they don't understand why.
So often one may find that people get fired from their jobs or relationships fall apart since that time.
Mm-hmm.
Is that possibly effect of that inward changes have been made but not acknowledged outwardly?
Yes, no, absolutely. But realize that people were fired from their jobs and relationships fell apart before 1995. But I know what you mean, because there's been a huge increase in that ever since 1995. And especially as we enter this world recession that we're busy entering in now. Economists today are no longer trying to hide the fact that the economic recession that the world is busy entering now is the greatest economic recession that the world has ever known. And of course, whenever this happens, all the personal issues start rising. And the first place it tends to rise is, of course, in our relationships. Whether it's our relationships at home or our relationships at work, but issues in relationships start to rise. That's also not surprising, because really all of life is but a system of relationships. People tend to think it's my wife and myself and my children and my family and my friends and my neighbors and so on. But really it's not about wives and children and neighbors. It's about relationships. So, with the cry of the eagle having sounded, what this means technically for humanity is that humanity has been called upon to change its life and its whole approach towards life in a most meaningful way. And of course, the more we resist change, the more change has to be forced upon us. So quite literally, we see the way we see the effects today is, as you yourself have noticed, more and more people are losing their jobs by the day, whether they're fired or whether they're being retrenched. And relationships are starting to suffer terribly, because people are being forced into change.
So in terms of relationships, then, is humanity evolving, or are we going backwards?
Elizabeth, again, that's not an easy question to answer, because people can so quickly misconstrue what I might say now. When we talk about evolution, the evolution of awareness, it is very seldom that the evolution of awareness proceeds unencumbered when everything is peaceful and everybody's happy. The reason being that when everything's working well and people are happy and they're totally at peace with where their lives are at, they tend to fall asleep. They become complacent and they no longer think about, why am I here? Why should they? Life is working wonderfully well, just as it is. So, often, in order for evolution to be given a boost, we have to go through very troubled and difficult times. So we can look at the world situation today and we can say we're going backward, which in one sense is perfectly true. But we're not actually going backward, in the sense that we are now getting the biggest boost that we've had in this century. When we will really know that we're going backwards is when, now that we've got this boost, we continue to get ourselves fired and our relationships fall apart, then we'll know that we've become stagnant. And if that doesn't help us, even knowing that we've become stagnant, if that doesn't help us, and matters still continue to get worse, well, then we know that we've really missed the boat, and therefore we're going backwards. But it is my hope that before we start going backwards, we'll actually wake up.
So do you believe, is that what humanity's biggest challenge is at this time? The need to wake up?
Indeed. But to wake up to the reality of what is actually transpiring in our lives, the reality of what it actually means to be alive on the physical plane.
So then do we have to resolve the past before we can make any real progress going forward?
From a technical perspective, it's impossible to really make progress in terms of moving forward unless we resolve the past. But I might also add that it doesn't actually work like this in practice. And I'll explain what I mean by this. Our past is brought about, or if you like, created, by a particular mindset that we had at that time, or that we had at that time. That mindset is dependent upon how we perceived life. So it's dependent upon a perception.